Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Brand Innovators live cast series. My name is Maddie Canny. I am a content and community manager here at BI, and I would like to welcome you to our live cast, Adapting to a Data-Deprived Advertising Future. We're super excited to get started, and we've got an amazing lineup of speakers today. So just before we start, want to give a quick thank you to our marketers, sponsors, and our audience for tuning in and making this event possible. We really appreciate you. And then just a couple housekeeping notes throughout the event. If you have any questions, there is a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So please use that for any questions for the speakers. Otherwise, there also is a chat, which you can use to talk amongst yourselves in the audience. So feel free to utilize that as well. That said, I'd like to welcome on our first group of speakers. We have Adam Benaroya, who's the Director of Global Media Capabilities and Operations at Johnson & Johnson. With him is our moderator, Jim D'Antoni, who's the Director of National Media Sales for Dish Media. Welcome.
Thanks, Maddie.
How are you doing today?
Doing well, thanks.
Good. Hi, Jim. How are you?
Good. How are you, Maddie? Good to be here.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. I'll let you guys get to it. Thanks.
Terrific. Really, thank you very much. Well, welcome everyone. And, again, Jim D'Antoni, Director of Sales at Dish Media. That's both Dish TV as well as Sling TV. Shameless 30 seconds here. We offer data-driven television solutions to the marketplace, most notably addressable advertising. When we sell addressable, we sell it across both Dish and Sling through our deal with ComScore. We're seeing a lot of activity in verticals such as pharma, auto, retail, travel, among others. But we also have a best-in-class Sling programmatic platform that is have been out there and established in the marketplace as a market leader for a couple of years. So I've been participating in Brand Innovators events for about 4 years. I always find them insightful. I think it's a great atmosphere that they've created, and it's always worth a listen. I'm sure today will be very much in line with that. So I'm thrilled to be here. Enough about me. I want to, just quickly welcome, Adam. Adam, has been at J&J for about a year. We'll let him introduce himself a little more properly in a bit. But and prior to that, he had spent a little stint at Hewlett Packard, and I did a little LinkedIn stalking, and looks like you started your career on the agency side, which is great. So welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Jim. Appreciate the intro, and yeah, I think you did a decent starting point there. Like you said, I've been with J&J for the past year now. I lead the Global Media Capabilities and Operations group, which sits within a larger consumer experience org, or CXO for short, as we refer to it. And ultimately, this latest consumer org within J&J Consumer Health is responsible for from media to brand and content, brand excellence, ad and martech, all of the kind of foundational pieces that support the full consumer journey, and e-com, all of the kind of extensions of where that over the last few years where that experience has grown. So a bit of a new team within the media org, at least. I kind of twofold responsibility. The global media org supports all of the global partnerships. So our core media partners, our global agency relationships, we partner with IPG and the J3 team as the primary group within IPG. And then a newer part of the remit, hence a lot of the hiring within my team over the last year has been to also support the org in a bit more of a specialized capability, brought on leads for programmatic, search, social, commerce media, kind of representing all of the core media channels to really support our region, support our markets and brands with what the next wave of innovation and capability development needs to be within those functions, and where we can support from a central standpoint.
Yeah, that sounds fascinating, and exciting. And I think you have played a role in creating the Center of Excellence that wasn't there. You helped build that.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I can't take full credit for it. The idea for this latest reorg predated my joining, and hence when I joined the team, some of the vision for that had already been established. But since then, like I mentioned, pretty much, with a few exceptions of legacy team members, the entire, almost the entirety of this team is either new to J&J, a lot of external hires, but also, some internal transfers into this new org too. Really, I think, there's a lot of reasons for it. I think the one key point has been, J&J Consumer Health just has had a desire for our marketers, our brand teams to get more invested in the day-to-day operations, the day-to-day, governance of our media activity. And in order to do that, we needed to build out a, more of a central, center of excellence team to support the region, support the markets, and what, for programmatic as an example, what does the next phase of capability development need to look like? What do we need to be thinking about internally at J&J on governing our programmatic investment? What should our brand teams be directly involved in from an optimization standpoint? So kind of building out that roadmap from a, not just a resourcing standpoint, but what does that best practice governance look like? Not to mention all of the, just capability developments that our team can be at the, forefront of the industry to make sure that we're bringing to the, to the inside of the org.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating how much the media marketplace has changed. Just, it was changing, that way prior to COVID, and it's accelerating in such great length. So you have all that going on. Oh, and let's throw a corporate reorg on top of that, and because you talked about J&J being decentralized, if you will, and this helps you kind of just map out to the different portions of the company that you need to touch base, and collaborate with.
Yeah, that's right. And for anyone on the line who hadn't heard the announcement, which came out towards the end of 21, J&J, in the next year, sometime during 23 will be the consumer health group, which is the predominant group that I represent within J&J, will be, spinning off into its own, publicly traded company. So, a lot, all of the separation activities and planning activities for that obviously have become a big focus for, what we intend to bring into the new consumer health organization. But definitely an exciting time to be here to, take the best of what J&J has built out, and also have the opportunity to redefine a bit what does this mean for more of a CPG specific organization in the future.
Sure. Okay, great. That's I don't know if there's anything else you want to add about the company or your team. If not, we can jump into some of the meat. But
let's jump in.
Okay, yeah, we're going to cover a number of subjects. Of course, preparing for a cookieless world. We're going to get into media mix modeling, balancing that balance of that migration of linear revenue to CTV. How do you balance that? How do you make sure that has worked and is still working and acts and affects the larger whole? So we had a really good prep session, and it seems like we've been preparing for a cookieless world for quite some time now as an industry, but it's coming, obviously. And so I know you've been doing a number of tests. You've been doing some clean room testing. We'd love to get into some of that, and any other testing you're doing. We can those are a number of questions that I have. But why don't we start with these? You're just broadly, how are you preparing for a cookieless world at J&J?
Yeah, I mean, as you said, there's a lot within there that we have kind of broken out into some separate tracks at this point, and probably a lot of it very similar to where the rest of our peers are focusing their efforts. Yeah, I think for us, and again, given that I've been here for a year, obviously there was prep work that happened beforehand, but the way that we've tried to define it is, a first step, from a global standpoint at least, is advising our each of the markets based on their individual tech stacks, media investment strategies, what percent, roughly speaking, of their investment is at risk in the future, based on the expected third-party cookie deprecation, just to have a baseline on what some of the most immediate opportunities were to focus our efforts, and depending on what stack each market has adopted, where we would recommend them to fast track some testing to move to platforms that we see as less at risk. Or, obviously everything has a risk component at this point. So kind of build out that baseline on where we're at on day one, and what we need to build out as a testing agenda to prep ourselves as much as possible. And within that testing agenda, obviously there's the broad topic of post third-party cookies. What are the other ID solutions that we have at our opportunity to test out now? Obviously, I think there is still a lot that needs to be proven out as far as how these new, what kind of adoption the new ID solutions will get, how consumers react to it. So our approach from an ID standpoint, obviously, has been to start with our existing strategic partners, many of which are the one, similar to the rest of the of the marketing org is, our existing stack obviously are at the forefront on defining what those new ID solutions are. So we're partnering with them to test them out, get some early insight on what kind of scale we're seeing, what some of the challenges are in executing non-cookie based media buying. But that's kind of one broad pillar. And then I think outside of that it's thinking about what our walled garden investment looks like. Obviously there's some, and with the exceptions obviously, but there's some level of stability in what their future ecosystem could look like. And not to say that we're shifting investment at large into walled gardens, but thinking about, especially for smaller markets, smaller budget brands, potentially thinking about how many building blocks of media channels do they need to support their media programs, and thinking about a tiered approach of from most basic to most complex on what those options are for markets, in the worst case future that they lose an option from some of the third party based cookie tactics that they're using right now. For us, like I mentioned, from a consumer health standpoint within J&J, obviously we have a huge roadmap with our retail partners, with the evolving retail media landscape, and thinking about not just retailers, but the entirety of the second party data ecosystem that we know we will need to leverage. And there's a lot of exciting opportunity within the retail space to integrate those data sets, those measurement capabilities as a another quote unquote future proofing idea of what might happen post third party. And then finally, obviously for what it makes sense for our brands from a first party consumer engagement standpoint, thinking about not just from a direct to consumer standpoint, but how are we just thinking about first party data acquisition? What does that consumer relationship look like for the future of a CPG organization? And both from a consumer engagement standpoint, but obviously what the resulting first party data collection and building out our CRM CDP programs to support that. Small right now, but something that we expect to hope to grow and scale as another pillar of what that total future proofing ecosystem might look like.
Yeah. I think you mentioned second party data testing with retailers.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think each retailer right now, I think, is a very different story on where they're at. Are they building out their own media activation platforms? Are they are they shifting from more managed service offerings to self-service offerings? Are they integrating with existing partners within our tech stack? Predominantly those retailers are thinking about not just their own platforms, but how to partner with, say, existing DSPs to leverage their data and their measurement solutions. So it's still, I wouldn't say it's disorganized, but each retailer is very much, coming with a different mindset on what they want their media offering to be. What do they want to own themselves? What are they willing to integrate into other, other third-party platforms? So we're really just building out that, even just that framework of how to evaluate different retailer offerings against each other. Put different, media budgets into market to test out their new capabilities. But, with the evolution and, hopefully long-term, the convergence of retail media into the rest of what we're doing from a national standpoint, obviously we're not quite there yet, but that is the vision that we're driving towards, is a huge opportunity from, a future-proofing standpoint, just knowing that, obviously those data sets will continue to stay rich over time, and we see as a, hugely important part of our future strategy, from not just from a data standpoint, but really from a integration of what had been separate siloed shopper media activations from the rest of our national campaign activity. So for a lot of reasons, not just from a future proofing standpoint, it is a huge area for investment in. Also, where we are trying to build our internal teams to be able to support that from a more direct standpoint than we have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing the explosion over the last, I don't know, 18 months, 24 months in that space specifically. It's just, and it's got, really good attribution, and it's mostly a display programmatic, kind of ecosystem. And, but I think, and sooner or later, I think you're going to start to see video,
Right.
go into that ecosystem. So, and that's a whole other, that's really, as big as it is and it's scaled up, it's really in its infancy when you really look at what it will become.
Yeah, I agree. Obviously they've built out great capabilities over the years, but the idea of how it's going to converge into the rest of the media ad tech stack and become a truly integrated component of what we execute on the media day in, day out, outside of say shopper specific investments, I think definitely in its infancy, and just a huge opportunity for, I think, all sides of the industry to build out that integration, and to your point, scale it to all as many media channels and formats as we can.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to circle back to attribution and just TV attribution versus data attribution. They're two different animals. Obviously, one is newer and less sophisticated, that being television. Can you just give us some of your thoughts on just the difference? And when you're measuring, are you using partners to measure both, or do you have specialists in both of those areas, or a combination?
I would say it's more holistic at this point. I mean, of course, there's more specialized or specific measurement frameworks by channel, but by and large, I would say roughly, the majority of our media investment is held to an ROI outcome at the end of the day, and working with your typical MMM plus MTA partners to build out that stack, and different levels of different partners, different levels of frequency that we're getting that insight across markets. Obviously, there's a spectrum there, but ultimately, J&J has found that standard, even with its limitations, and of course there are limitations, that standard across media investments has been a reliable way to rationalize our investment and optimize across channels on a longer term cadence. But with that baseline, to the question on how we're say migrating from linear TV investments to CTV and newer channels where perhaps the measurement opportunity is a bit more limited at the moment. There's challenges there, and there's implications on how fast it allows us to move investments into newer channels. But with that said, I mean, of course, as everyone would say the same, we know where the consumers are going. We know where we do need to scale to. So we've been very invested, not just us, but IPG and the J3 teams have been a great partner in helping us push the measurement requirements in in TV specifically, in the spectrum of what we need to see from a CTV standpoint, so that we have that same basis to rationalize against CTV as we have had for quite a while in some of our digital investments. But with that said, that's not it's not necessarily slowing us down from making those budget shifts as we need to. But of course, with what we would hope to see from a measurement standpoint, and not just measurement from a pricing standpoint. There's discrepancies on what we can get from a linear standpoint that we can't get in CTV at this standpoint. There's many factors that are playing into it. Obviously, we have like a short list on what we would like to see change to fast track that investment growth even more than we're at the moment.
Got it. Good stuff. So in terms of, you mentioned another thing in our prep session, just, going back to desperately trying to find a solution for a cookieless, ecosystem, just to make sure that the trains are running time to prop your business so you don't lose momentum on your business, as instead of trying to improve that creative framework and the way you message to people to try to influence consumer behavior. I found that was very thoughtful, and I'd love you to just share a little of that with the group, the audience.
Yeah, I think it's not even just from my time at J&J, but prior to that, because obviously my last role we were starting with the prep work here as well, and just it's not to take away from the importance of everything I just spoke about, of like all the different pillars of how we need to future-proof the investment, and all of the time that we're spending there is well justified. My soapbox, my concern for the industry is that it sometimes feels like we're spending all of our time talking about cookies are going away. What can we do to rebuild it to protect this ecosystem that we've built out over the last decade? And not enough time recognizing what this shift means on what consumers are asking for from brands and how they want to protect their data, and how they envision a future for privacy. And off of that, thinking about what is a meaningful way to communicate our message to those consumers. Again, obviously our brand teams are putting together thoughtful messaging plans and creative development plans. But from a media organization, from a media industry standpoint, I think we have a role in that as well, to not just build out what is the next ideal solution that's going to continue the status quo for us, but can we invest as much conversation in building more engaging creative formats that, regardless of our targeting efficiencies, we're building out quality formats that are actually going to be a compelling way for a consumer to engage with us, and thinking about what the future of that looks like as well. I don't think we can defer that conversation to our creative and brand teams entirely. I think we have an important role there to think about what can we be doing better there. That, of course, we want to bring in the best of our targeting capabilities and measurement capabilities, but I think if we solve some of the issues we have from the formats that we're investing millions of dollars of budget in right now, the right way to get our consumers to engage with us or for them to respond to us, I think it's ultimately a missed opportunity if the industry is only focused on the former, which I think sometimes we're only focused on the former.
Yeah, no, that's good stuff. All right, the other thing we didn't chat a lot about, but just it's interesting, and we're in, the upfronts are done now, but it's interesting, at least I find, last year, a lot of people got, 2 years ago, burned and scattered. People put money, almost oversubscribed last year as a whole, and it seems they've been, there's still a lot of money that was transacted, but they're holding some money back. Are you, do you hold some money back just for innovation? Do you look at, I don't want to, I don't want you to share anything, proprietary, quick on the spot, but just curious how the upfront continues to evolve. 2 years ago, everyone said the upfront's dead, and it's not, obviously, but it continues to morph. Streaming, is such a bigger part. Obviously, CTV is a big part of that. Just love to hear just some of your thoughts on the upfront overall.
Yeah, I think it's to what you said too. It's a bit of a combined hybrid approach. Of course, we have continuing the upfronts and thinking about how to get the efficiencies through that, but generally speaking, and not just for kind of TV investments, we always are Of course, to what I was saying around, the importance of ROI to us, and, investing in established, proven channels and tactics is important to us. We purposely want to be clear on like what percent of the total investment should go towards those proven channels, and perhaps invest in the upfront as the basis for our linear TV planning, but be clear on what is that minority percent investment that we encourage brands to hold back for purposeful testing, and whether it's new channels, new programs, new inventory, new tactics, that isn't proven to ROI potentially at all yet, so that we have a basis for fast tracking some of the investment changes that we know have to happen in the years to come, whether that's investing more in CTV or investing more in social properties that we're currently under leveraging at the moment. So it's both. I mean, we do have clear guidelines on what we think that percentage splits should be on proven investments versus unproven investments, but having a framework for how those unproven investments, what they need to prove out, what is the, from a global standpoint, having visibility across what all the markets are testing so that we can bring learnings across, and make sure that holistically we have the right tests in market, the right unproven tactics in market, so that we have that as a basis for bringing that over to some of the proven opportunities for the next year, 2 years out. So I think to what you were asking from a upfront standpoint, that obviously I think that plays into that mindset too, and we try to find that right balance between the two.
Yeah, and the other obvious thing that has changed the upfront is just the infusion of data as part of the conversation, part of the part of the transaction in many cases as well. But that's I think the upfront is here to stay, and it will no longer and personally I think data will continue to be a bigger part of that, and for all the right reasons from that standpoint. But I want to ask you again, this is something we didn't cover much of, but just you talked about how vast J&J is, and you've got this team of the Center of Excellence. How often are you dealing directly with brand managers? Individual brand. Is that if there's a launch, if you will, or is there an ongoing cadence to the conversations you have?
So it's a good question, and I think it's a model because our org has obviously changed quite a bit over this last year, not just my team, but across the regions, and how they've invested in more in-house talent to govern the investment. So it's a work in progress, and I think we're transparently finding what that right balance is. My global team, the broader global team, obviously are a few steps removed from the day-to-day of what the brand teams are executing. We have regional counterparts who help us bridge that gap between some of the global priorities and how what they're seeing from the local brands, from an investment priority, capability priority standpoint. With that said, though, say we have a key initiative around, I'll throw out an example. We've spent a lot of the last year revising our approach to paid search and the framework behind that. We're being choiceful on which brands or which markets we're having that direct conversation with, based on the ones that we think are perhaps most eager or most ready, or has the biggest opportunity to implement that new framework. And in those kind of more, I would describe it more as a pilot case, not an always on conversation. We're bringing those specific capabilities to the local brands based on what we're hearing from our kind of regional counterparts who are helping organize all of that local input together. So it's a large org. There's a lot of kind of steps to that process. And I think we're definitely long-term looking to grow that direct engagement to not just build out these higher level ideas and capabilities, but actually see it through to practice. And there's more of that local integration that we know we need to get to off of this new structure. But that's roughly speaking how the, from global to regional to local process is meant to work.
Great, thank you. I just want to circle back to media mix modeling. Just how often is the cadence of taking hard looks at it, or is that an ongoing kind of keep your finger on the pulse, or is that quarterly? And then when would you act to optimize on that? If you can give us some insight on that.
Yeah, it depends on the market. Not surprisingly, the U.S. has the most frequent, and would be having that conversation at the very least quarterly. Where possible, we've overlaid the primary MMM measurements with some MTA capability as well, which has the opportunity to be more frequent. For example, monthly. But the reality is some of our smaller markets don't have the budgets or the non-working budgets to support as frequent as ideally we would want to see. So it is a spectrum. I mean, regardless of if it's quarterly, half year, yearly, depending on the market, it of course is a slower cadence of how that is influencing planning and optimization decisions. So I would say the corollary to that conversation is how we've tried to build out more of a performance marketing, performance media measurement framework to support those longer term cadences as well. Where possible, proving out which more real-time KPIs we know will influence ROI outcomes, but to give the team something to have more of a regular basis of optimizing the investment, and not just waiting for the MMM results to come back. So I think probably like any CPG, a similar story on obviously MMM as a source of truth to make the bigger investment shifts and the bigger planning decisions, but to build out some of that operational optimization layer, which we haven't always had in the past, to make sure we're not losing track of what we can do on a weekly, bi-weekly, monthly basis as well.
Got it. Thank you. You had mentioned J3 and IPG as your main agency partners and media partners. I mean, they're right up there in terms of the best in the business, in my opinion. They're the level of sophistication they bring to just the broader media ecosystem, but just from my specific purview, just their television investment team, Kinesso, they're just doing it right, and so you're, how often are you in contact with them weekly? And I assume you're dealing directly with J3
every day to some level, depending on the topic. We have a great partnership with them that obviously well predates my time being here, given the legacy that we have with that team. I think you mentioned their ability to help us push the TV ecosystem on measurement requirements, and where we see the need for that to advance each of those future proofing pillars that I walked through at the start of the call. They're very much a partner with us on defining what those mean. What is that maturity assessment that we take to each of the markets to evaluate what's at risk, what the most immediate needs are for each of the markets to address the planning work for the next couple of years. We similar to our deep global, regional, local structure, they have a structure that very much mirrors that as well. So my team primarily is partnering with the global and our regional counterparts at J3 to see all parts of this agenda come into fruition. And definitely it's a deep collaboration. In some areas they're driving more, in some other areas J&J is taking the lead, but it's been a good balance of having their support along the way. And certainly on some any of the future facing requirements have been a critical resource to help keep us on top of the agenda as well. Yeah, no doubt. Good stuff. All right, and then we talked a little about this, just about leadership, in a hybrid, kind of world, or remote world. I mean, I mentioned to you that I've hired someone who worked with me a year, and they resigned, and I never met them face to face. Going back, in the earlier days of COVID, but
it sounds like, most people, the turnover is real across the board, whether you're on the sales side, agency side, client side. Turnover is a reality, and the ability to get someone who can do the job well, but they live in another time zone or another market. It's people are just grabbing at that, and it changes the dynamic. I love to, sounds like, and it's also you had a little pre-COVID hybrids experience as well. But love to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's clearly some mixed perspectives on where this will end up, but you mentioned, prior to my time at J&J, I led global media for Hewlett Packard Enterprise, and well before COVID was a very dispersed organization. So even though obviously there were offices that every employee was going to, the cross-country, cross-globe collaboration ultimately made it very close to a virtual working environment, because you were very much were not just working with individuals in that one location. So I think I was still at that employer as the shift post-COVID happens, and it was probably as seamless of an experience there than probably more more companies felt during that disruption. So kind of that obviously has impacted that was new for me. When I was agency side, I was very much working with a New York based team with few exceptions. So that was a transition for me when I first made that that shift. But now coming into J&J, which also dispersed, but a lot of central teams based in the New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania area. I think we're figuring out as J&J what that means for us. But I think based on different experiences coming into this, I think everyone is kind of taking a different approach on when are they with offices reopening, when are we when are we asking teams to come together, when are we not asking teams to come together, how are we making hiring decisions. A few of the team members that I've brought on, I've purposely had a broader recruiting strategy, and have team members across the country, even as we're potentially going back into the office and the New York, New Jersey area. So not quite an answer to, I guess, like what the future of this looks like, but for me personally, I've gotten used to that comfort level. And with that said, hoping to still, I think we need to find a good way to organize teams back into the office for either for full day working sessions, or finding the right time to re-engage that part of the working model that we've lost, because clearly that's something that we all, maybe not all, but many of us want to bring back into the mix, even as we continue to appreciate the hybrid options that we have at the moment.
Yeah, it's striking that balance that you can connect and hopefully influence in a in-person way that you can't, and that's always supplemented by the majority of the conversation, or the relationship is still going to be over a screen, but it just helps I think it helps for culture. I think it helps on a number of reasons, So I think we have 2 minutes left here. So I wanted to see, I don't know if you have any predictions for either the back half of this year, or even 2023, just in terms of media overall.
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll take it back to the main topic of today. Maybe it's based on all of, I think you said at the start, the prepping for this future landscape has felt like a very long and delayed time frame, and based on what how far we've seen partners get to at this point, I have to predict that it will continue to be delayed off of some of the latest timelines that we're thinking about. I think all of this prep work, regardless of when any of that deprecation actually happens, will be needed, but I still feel like we don't have I don't think the industry has a good sense on exactly when that cutoff date will be, that all of this new planning will take place over any of the cookie based options. So not necessarily a second half prediction, but I predict that this will take longer than we even expect at this moment.
I actually second that prediction. Yeah, it's just the way it is, but I think as long as we're making progress,
Yeah.
slowly and surely, for improvement. And that's not the only area that needs improvement, but I think everyone is interested in finding solutions, whether that be cross-screen measurement across the board. But anyway, hi, Maddie. Are we done?
Hi, sorry. Yeah, we're just about at time, not to kick you guys off, but it was a great conversation. So thank you both so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Of course. Adam, thank you very much.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Maddie and team.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Have a good one. All right, so we are on to our next session. I would like to welcome on Josh Palu, who is the SVP of Growth Marketing for LendingTree, LLC, and our moderator, Josh, Lustgarten, who's the VP of Monetization at TextNow. Welcome. Hi, how are you?
Good.
Hello.
Hello.
How are
How's
you?
it going? Doing good, thanks.
Good, awesome. I'll pass it off to you two.
All right, thank you for the intro. Josh, I see the two of us are both brave souls that are both in an office today, or possibly in the airport lounge. I know that you were traveling.
Yeah, no, I'm actually in our Charlotte. Well, we're headquartered in Charlotte, and so I came to the office today, and I've got this room with a decent background. But just so the brand innovator people to know, I'm trying to find that virtual background you sent me, just for the record. I'm trying to comply with what you said to me to do.
Same. Awesome. Well, thought that the two of us could start to get into it. So I'm Josh Lustgarten from TextNow. We're a free phone service supported by advertising. I was brought on board at TextNow roughly 2 years ago. One, to further scale the sales org, but two, and why we're here today, because a big piece of the mission really came with solidifying and growing our data strategy. As we start to think about a world without cookies, without these device identifiers and whatnot. So I am joined by Josh Palu, someone that we're all lucky to have here today to discuss the strategy and discuss data. Josh, first, congrats on the new role at LendingTree. I know you're just over a month in, so that's exciting stuff. You're now back on the client side. You have some pretty heavy hitting roles on the agency side. We'll speak to that, and we'll talk more about what you're doing on the LendingTree. But before we get into everything, thought you might want to take a quick moment and introduce yourself to the group.
Yeah, thanks. And thanks, Brand Innovators, again, for having me. Thanks, Josh, for being the host. So I'm Josh, as it said on the agenda. I just joined LendingTree as the SVP of Growth Marketing and Media. For those of you who may or may not know much about LendingTree, it's always been this company that's been focused on really helping consumers get the right decisions made for their financials, lots of financial decisions, be it a home loan, a personal loan, a business loan, credit cards. It was always really, positioned. It's a 24-year-old company. So in the grand scheme of things, not terribly old, considering I've worked for companies that have been around for hundreds of years. But what's really interesting is as the consumers changed and as the model and this whole sort of world is changing around us, specifically in the world of finance, the mission is now becoming a lot more around how do we educate consumers to make the smartest financial decisions? How do we help the consumer, frankly, win? We just launched our first in a really long time TV campaign yesterday around this whole positioning. We have a new CMO that joined earlier this year, Shiv Singh, who many people know. Shiv and I worked together years ago at Razorfish, but we're trying to take the company from what has been historically direct response focused, lead aggregation, to also incorporate brand, because what we've learned is brands matter. And I think for a while there, our industry sort of wasn't sure how much that mattered, but I do think brands matter, and I do think there's something that people think about when they have a trust, especially with a decision like this. And so I'm really excited to take over these channels. It's a mix of search, display, programmatic, native, media partnerships. So a real big sort of group of tactics and channels that I've had a lot of experience with.
Awesome. Excited to hear more. Today, we'll be talking about data, adapting to a data-deprived future, which kind of vague, but we'd love to kind of hear your thoughts on that, and what that means for people on both sides of the ball. So one side being the marketers, other side being the publishers. And it's funny, Josh, when the two of us were doing our prep, we actually started to talk about what does this mean? Are there certain types of marketers that is going to hurt more than others? And your response to me was actually, at a high level, this is not changing, right? It's the same thing that we've been doing for the last 50 or 60 years. There's just a bit less personalization. So with that, and before we get into it, I thought that we would structure today's conversation into a pair of pieces. First half, why don't we talk about where we are currently with data and data governance and the ways that the two of us use it. Second half, we'll talk about the data-deprived future. So what do we think is going to happen? What's the plan B? And how are you advising your clients, and how are you building out your client infrastructure?
Yep.
Does that sound good?
Sounds great.
Awesome. And we'll leave about 5 to 10 minutes at the end of this for questions from the group. So if you have questions, please just type it into the chat box. So why don't we start, Josh? Let's talk about you. Let's talk about your experience. Let's talk about some things that you told me you enjoy. So you enjoy building. You enjoy putting processes in place. And if you look at your resume, you pick some pretty big name brands, some pretty big name agencies that really had the right pieces. You just didn't think that they were being put together in the right way. So why don't we start with that?
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple of things, and I do think as I often try to do with these kinds of setups, like, hopefully everybody gathers like some piece of information outside of my general rambling on things that you could pull out. But I do think over my career, looking at all the companies I've worked at, there's consistencies with all of them. And so where you and I were talking about and how I think it relates here is that when a lot of the struggles that companies run into are things that they put in place, either like how they manage their processes, either with marketing, how they manage their agencies, how they manage their internal resources, what they do from a data perspective. And the challenge with all of that is like the provocative statement one, the consumer doesn't care. The consumer doesn't care that you have a performance marketing team and a brand marketing team and then a search team that sort of does something with affiliates. Like they don't care. Like they have a need. Hopefully you serve that need. They want to make a meaningful connection with you. Or hopefully actually you want to make a meaningful connection with them to drive the result you want to drive. And that doesn't mean that you have to live in a world of pure performance. But I think what I've always sort of gravitated towards is that every piece of your marketing channel has to perform. So years and years and years ago, performance marketing was born. It was typically search agencies with this idea that like that was about performance. And what I always remember when that happened was so many people who were working really hard on really tough client topics and really hard media channels saying, wait, I perform. Like, what do you mean performance media is only search or it's only programmatic? And so my point is that every part of your marketing channel has to perform. It just performs differently and it has to be measured differently in that way. So a lot of what I have spent time with organizations is figuring out like where we're spending our money, what's the desired outcome, and then sort of where do we go from there? So when you think specifically about LendingTree and what we just did, I mean, we just launched a TV campaign. And we've got tons of data and tons of attribution, and we have lots of first-party data that we look at and measure and optimize. It's a very well-run machine. This TV campaign, it doesn't fit into that measurement machine that we've had because it's different ways that you measure it. And there's different outcomes you're looking, right? Like we're trying to raise awareness, we're trying to gain trust, we're trying to reach a broader consumer, we're trying to reach more consumers. And so I just think that one of the traps that companies fall into is trying to measure everything against what it's always supposed to be, right? Like it's always MTA, so we're only going to measure against MTA. It's always media mix modeling, so we have to measure everything that way. And I just think that becomes really cumbersome and harder to make those kinds of quick decisions that you need when you're bucketed that way.
Okay, so a quick follow-up question there. You talk about performance and how the focus of television is to drive top of funnel. Is it fair or unfair when you think about digital media, because that's where search is, that's where typically social is, has digital turned into just a performance vehicle, or is there a place for branding?
Oh, there's absolutely a place for branding. I mean, you can like if you think about a lot of the brands, and it's funny, I bring up Peloton because everybody brings up Peloton, but like forget about all the crap they're going through now. But like when you think of brands that were born more to the D2C brands, whether they were Bombas or Bonobos or Peloton or all these other ones, I mean, there are some really solid brands that were born digitally. So I believe wholeheartedly, especially given the way the consumption patterns are changing, and you kind of throw connected TV sort of into digital, but it's really not the same as digital. But there's absolutely ways to build brands just using digital channels. I believe that wholeheartedly because I think it's pretty like, I mean, if you think about it, traditional marketing, and for those of you who are old enough to have gone through traditional marketing classes, it's like the building of a brand is again, it's about this, it's about solving this problem, it's about meeting this need of a consumer, it's about making that connection. Ultimately, it's about, how do I win over somebody else? So why is my product better than my competitor's product? Like and when I say this is the reason to believe for our product, can anybody else say that? And so I think you can make that message using a nice combination of search, of video, of display banners, like all of those things coming together, I think are a way to pull that. And I do think to that sort of, I think where we were headed is like, I do think that's become a bit of the downside to digital at times is it gets put in this bucket of direct response, or it gets put into this bucket of performance in a, like, what are we measuring? What are we measuring? And so I think for so many companies who have struggled with shifting that media mix of like how they spend, I think it's for that reason. Right? You're used to saying like, well, we have to drive this awareness and TV reaches the most people. And, look, digital is only there for sales and for conversions. And if you're not thinking about it in the whole consumer journey, then you're probably missing a big part of your audience.
Yeah, agreed. We have the same conversations on a weekly basis at Text now as we start to grow. Is do we put a more broad awareness on television? Do we put more into search for acquisition? And
right.
Just kind of a conversation that is always ongoing.
Yeah.
Could we spend a minute talking about LendingTree real quick? You are relatively new there,
yes,
but would love to hear. And I think the best part about going into a new job is that you assess and you analyze what someone is doing well. And then you also think about where's their opportunity. And so are you able to talk about things that you think that they're doing extremely well, and then an opportunity that you are excited to help with?
Yeah, well, so I'll answer it two ways, but I will give you an answer. I'll talk about all things we're doing well. To your point, I'm here 30 days. I think it's the start of week 3, and so and we had a town hall yesterday, and I asked the same question, like, what opportunities do you see? I think one of the mistakes leaders make when they walk in a door is quick judgment or a quick assessment or quick commentary on what they're doing wrong. By the way, I've walked into many organizations where it's like, yep, that's probably not optimal. But I think there's some like nice way to sort of endear the team that's been doing this work for so long that you don't just step in on that. Because by the way, I've often found that only a small percentage, you're only right about a small percentage of those things. Like I've walked into organizations where I was like, that doesn't seem like the way most organizations are doing it or best practices. And then you sometimes find out that there's some complete random reason why it's happening that way. So it's not that people don't want to do things a certain way or do things up to best practices. It's a CEO decision sometimes it's a technology decision. So I can at least say off the bat that in terms of things that we're doing really, really well, there's a deep understanding of the consumer. We've done a lot more work to get to know the consumer a lot better in this changing environment. And that was sort of the underpinning of the TV campaign, was the research that we had done to learn more about this consumer. And so, and sort of what help they need to make these decisions. But I do think that historically we've had a good handle on our consumer. We've understood like where to push forward on in terms of opportunity, where to pull back on. We've understand when and when not to use data. I mean, the thing about direct response sort of advertising is you were driven a lot by performance numbers, or just numbers in general, and that's not a bad thing. I mean, when I took my first client side job at Comcast, I remember people from the agency calling and asking like, "What's the biggest difference?" And there was a few, but the most striking one is you talk about the numbers every day. And so it's not to disparage any other companies out there, agencies, publishers, platforms, but when you're a client, like you talk about your numbers every single day because they literally drive how you pay all of your bills. And so for LendingTree, what I have found is there's a lot of conversation around the numbers. And and what's happening now with leadership that's coming in is there's a good, healthy debate on how much can you push brand message without sort of upsetting that balance. And it's not to say that we won't push forward on things. We want to push forward on it thoughtfully, because look, the last thing we want to do is say, hey, you know what, let's take 40% of the budget and put it here. It's untested, it's unproven, but it's brand focused, and we want to build this brand. And then all of a sudden see performance crater. Like that's not the way to do it. So I think that's a lot of the stuff that we're doing well. I think search is another big, strong component for us. What we're doing with our media partnerships, with our display performance, there's a lot to be done there. I think to flip to the other side. So, what do I think? I think what I can say, openly now, openly probably isn't the right word, but is every organization I've come into, there's been, I'd say 2 to 3 things that like off the bat you can look at and evaluate and find opportunities to drive more effectiveness. Like one is frankly just like organizational design. And that's not about reorg. It's just how are we working together? Like how are we coming together? How are we sharing information? You know, if you have an agency involved, how much are you bringing them into the conversation? Are you giving them sort of, because I will say coming from agency side also over my career, like sometimes you're only as, not sometimes, you're only as good as your client will let you be. And I've always said, I did get a lot of heat for being the in-housing person for a little while. But I always maintained that part of the problems for agencies is the client, because we don't want to pay for strategic resources. We want cheap media. We want you guys to be really efficient with what you do. We may or may not share all the data we have. And so how could you be expected to do a world-class job when you have half the information and a third of the budget? So that being said, I think first is in those ways of working, who's got decision rights, who's making decisions on things, where are we putting the money? I think that's one big bucket I always see. The second is, you know, when you are client side, you're sort of insulated to your category. You know, you're insulated to your category. Yes, you're learning. Yes, you're reaching out. You're attending brand innovators events. You're doing these kinds of things to learn more. But sometimes you're focused on what your category and what your team has been doing. And so sometimes you either haven't met with certain partners, you haven't tried things. You've tried something 3 years ago and it didn't work, and there's nobody to champion trying it again because everybody's still here. And so I always love when new people join the organization, because I always feel like, hey, what have you done? Like you've done something that we didn't do, and I want to hear how it worked. And maybe it's good and maybe it's not good, but let's sort of talk through it. So I think that's the other one. And I think the third thing is the partnership mix. So the sort of who are we using? How are they performing? You know, what are we missing from some of these things? And then lastly is probably around data and measurement. And I will say, I just can say pretty confidently, I'm not as concerned about that here, but I've walked into lots of places where, I mean, specifically, you know, at Bayer and at J&J, I think a lot of our decisions for being so heavily linear at the time was based on data that we didn't have about digital performance. And then once we started implementing things like multi-touch attribution and more aggressive media mix modeling, we learned that actually like digital was driving significant performance. And so funding started to flow that way, because then you could have a thoughtful conversation with a CFO to say, hey, I'm driving profitable results with this particular tactic, but you're funding at a third of what we could be spending. And that's, then you really get at the heart of how to make change.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's talk about data a bit more. What would you say, as you've been on the client side, you've been on the agency side, what has been the biggest or the most impactful type of data advancement that you've really leaned into?
Well, I mean, it's some of it is going to be pretty standard, I think, from what other people will say. I think using targeting or audiences in a way that's indicative of the behaviors you're trying to push forward. I think over time, I've seen too many people spend time in, I might answer it a different way, but this is how I'm answering it. Tell me if it's right or not. And so there's a degree of like, well, let's go after this audience, because this audience, you know, the audience you're going after, and you go after these things that are broad in nature and sort of make sense, but they're not as close to trying to get to the desired impact. So when you really think about it, I guess the way to boil it down is like, what data signals can I take in that will tell me that this person is as close to a decision and in the category I want to be in as possible? So things like loves to travel, enjoys music, you know, has gone to an outdoor concert, like that's really nice, but that's a lot of people in the world. And I'm telling you, know, maybe post-COVID, those numbers change, but like pretty much that's what people like to do. And so I try to focus on staying away from sort of more of those like higher level affinity metrics and look more towards kind of metrics that actually show an impact or an action. So whether it's purchase signal, whether it's a consumption signal of a platform. I made the comment about outdoor events, but if I sell a product that actually is like, if I sell a bug spray, I kind of want to target people who are going to outdoor events. So I think you have to get closer to the data signals that give you some belief that A, they're in my category, like they want to buy my product, and B, they're inclined to. So we spent a lot of time in consumer health looking at it wasn't contextual in the way you and I have been talking about it. It's sort of contextual of, well, like I make an allergy product, so I should probably buy WebMD's allergy section. And while true, because I think people who are WebMD probably are not prone, but predisposed to maybe taking a medicine, they might not be. And so like, I think it's more effective if I start looking at people who have purchased a product or purchased a competitor or purchased in the category and have they purchased from a Walmart. Like if I look at those signals, I feel like that gets me closer. And so I can be more efficient that way because I don't have to make a direct deal with WebMD, but I could also be more effective because I'm getting someone who, again, has exhibited a behavior that tells me they're in my category and they want to buy.
Yeah. Okay. So you actually just mentioned something that I think is, I mean, everybody has a different opinion on this, and I would love to hear the opinion from an expert like yourself. We have so much data at our disposal. When is there too much data? So for instance,
Every day.
Are we, so is it best for a marketer to kind of just, let's call it buy contextually, or is it best for a marketer to pay an extra dollar on the CPM for that, like outdoors, pay an extra dollar for people that are men, pay an extra dollar for people. And so all of a sudden your CPM goes from, let's call it an average of $2 or $3 to about 15 or 20 for this micro niche segment. When is that too much?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple of threads to chase out on this one. It is a good question. I do think it's something a lot of people struggle with. So first off, I think that anybody that's in broad reach categories, so consumer packaged goods, consumer health, I'd even never throw automotive and travel in that. I think a level of targeting that doesn't get you to just be so narrowly defined to like left-handed women who do yoga. Like, I think that's probably your sweet spot. So have to have done business travel, have purchased a product, have certain number of people in the household of a certain age. Like, I think there's something to that I think is effective and powerful. And to your point a little bit, as you touched on contextual, I think contextual works. I think contextual always worked. We just didn't have the measurement to prove it out as well as we do now. And because I do think that, this is, I think, what you were alluding to when you said earlier, like there's a tremendous amount of iconic historical brands that people love and consume every day that were built on a TV, print, radio model, right? Like that's just true. And what did they do? They went on soap operas and magazines and newspapers in categories that their consumer was in, right? So like I was Nike and I'm selling a running shoe. Well, I would buy Runner's World magazine, and that makes sense, but I think we got into this world of like, oh, but you could find that runner everywhere. And that is absolutely true. But I don't think you ignore this thing that happened over here, because at some point, again, between accuracy of cookies, between fraud, viewability, all these things, you start to realize that like we might have swung too far to one side. So overall, I think it starts with who is that consumer and how deep down the niche do you need to go? I think, especially in the pharmaceutical space, I think in certain sort of fitness categories, I guess automotive, even though I said it was in the other category, it could fall into this one. You've got a specific consumer in mind, right? Like if you want to buy like an electric vehicle, like there are some insights that'll get you down there, and it's worth paying more because the payout's more. And I guess that's my second thread that I was talking about, is like, what's the payout model and what's the return? Mm-hmm. We knew there was a CPM that you could pay and be profitable, more or less. And over a certain point, it didn't matter. So like, I don't care how high end the placement was. I don't care how great your audience is. It is a business aspect to it. And I think that is the major thing that stuck with me from the second I left the agency to going client side and then going back to agency and back to client side, is that the understanding of how a business actually runs is so critical to what you can do for a company. And I say that because you start to understand that I can't pay a $20 CPM and turn a profit on my product. And so like, again, it's great that you're impactful. It's great that you've got great reach. It's great that you have an audience of people with kids in the household that make over $100,000, but I can't make money off $20 CPM. So it either becomes like, you shouldn't call on me anymore. And I say that nicely, by the way. I just think it makes sense. Or it becomes,
which is helpful to sellers.
Yeah, right. Which by the way, again, I blame clients. I am one again, like that we don't do that sometimes. Like there's a math equations that goes through all of this, and it shouldn't be as rigid. And it just means that there's a percentage of my budget that I can't give you because I can't make that profitable. If I'm launching a new line extension, if I'm launching a new product, if I'm launching a TV campaign, I will spend out of that range, because going back to what I said in the beginning of the conversation, I'm measuring those things differently. Right? I'm measuring those things on reach and awareness and brand equity and those kinds of things that are just different. But if I'm looking for what's going to drive sales, there's a math measurement piece in place where data will price me out.
Yeah, makes sense. Also very nice to hear that type of intel from the client side as well. So thank you for that. So we're a little over halfway through. I want to focus. So we talked about what we're doing well with data currently and how we best apply data. Let's talk about what's the plan B, right? So we're about to shift to a world where Apple kick things off already. They pulled cookies, they pulled the mobile device IDs. Google is saying that this is about to happen at some point next year. We'll see if it really does happen. Fingers crossed it does not, right? But so what I've started to think about, what I'm tasked with, is how do we protect our future revenue and how do we gather as much first-party data as possible, right? So couple of things just to kind of throw out there, and I'd like to hear your thoughts. We don't focus as much on Apple and iOS. We focus more on Android. We can monetize it much better, right? But now we're thinking about if Google goes away with the device identifiers, and if they go away with the types of data that you would get, what is more valuable? How do you think about that? So have things like that already started being discussed at LendingTree, and then you've been hearing that discussed at different industry topics?
Yeah, I think in general, and I'm sure there's a follow-up here, like in general, yes. I mean, the idea of building out your first party data and creating lookalikes around that, that is something like that. First, something companies should have been doing forever, but I understand why you might not have. The reliance on third party made sense. And by the way, there's only like the one that, it's I hate to keep going back to the consumer health category, but it's just so perfect when you think about this. Like, you don't want a relationship with your pain reliever. You want to know a little bit about it. You want to know how much to take. You want to know if it'll make you sleepy. You want a coupon. Like, it's not, I don't need this. So the fact that consumer health companies historically, I'm talking broadly about the category, typically don't have giant databases of first party data it makes sense if you really think about it. Typically what they have is a lot of people who like coupons. And I'd argue that's probably not your top consumer. You know what I mean? Like, when you're talking about a $12 bottle of a pain reliever, like, that's not someone who's going to spend that money doesn't care. I mean, everybody cares about a dollar saved, but if you target your first party data strategy against a bunch of people who want coupons, I feel like you're going to hit the wrong consumer. So that said, I think there's a lot to be done in that space to keep growing and trying to get there. So my point is my advice is like, where do you partner to get the signals and the data that you need to sort of build out what that looks like? Shifting over for a second. I mean, until Google literally turns off third-party cookies, I don't know that they're ever going to turn off third-party cookies. And it's one of those statements that, like, I'm going to make, and then, like, if I'm right, like, you guys are going to like, wow, he actually knew that. I don't think anybody's going to say wow, by the way. But if I'm wrong, no one's going to remember that I was wrong about it, because the whole industry was wrong about it. But it just feels like they're making positioning now to maybe break up the company a little bit, though I think their breakup of how they're describing it makes no sense at all, because looks like they're still going to keep it under Alphabet, and that just seems like still the same company. So I think they're trying to make some concessions. I think no one will admit it, but I think there's some underlying, no one will say it out loud, hope that unified ID grows to a way that can be competitive with them, and then people stop sort of paying attention. I think they have so much money to pay the fines that, not that anybody wants to pay the fines, but I think if you think about the world that gets wrecked for them when they pull that out, I think it's not in their best interest. Like, this was like phasing out third-party cookies was about risk mitigation. It wasn't about anything else. And that's fine. Like, you should make decisions off of risk mitigation. Like, I would never want to be sued. If I could do something to not get me sued, I would go do that. But I think that, so my point is that, all that said, the world and the accuracy of third-party data was okay. And when you factor in, like you just described, you factor in mobile devices, Safari, Firefox, like, there's not a ton of it out there anyway. And I say ton, relatively speaking. So I think that the more you can partner with companies that have accurate identity-based data on their sites, the more that they have consumer data that they've taken in, that they can say, hey, like, we're able to sell this to you. The retail media networks, I think this is why they're thriving so they're not so well, they're thriving right now. I would love to figure out how I could use them, because I don't sell a product in a retail environment, but like, they have the real data. Like, they literally know it's me. I was in the store, I bought AA batteries, and like, here's the other things I bought. So I think all those pieces coming together are where you have to come up with your identity solution.
Okay. So, like a prediction here, we all can't predict the future, but we all have our opinions, and I appreciate you sharing your opinions early on. Are we going back to more on the contextual side? So again, if you're Nike, you happen to sell running shoes, we should buy ads in a running magazine. Or is it now going back to publishers and content owners are king that have zero in first party data?
I think it's somewhere. I don't think we're going back to a world of contextual, or pure contextual, but let me just say this out loud. Like, I think and you and I made this joke, if you're old enough, you understand that, like, you've seen the ad that's like, this is not your father's Oldsmobile. And because it's like, Oldsmobile was this like old car, and if you were young and hip, you would never drive it. The reality is that it was absolutely your father's Oldsmobile. I don't care what they changed it to look like. The fact that it's called Oldsmobile, it's old, like, it's in the name that it's old. I hope nobody from Oldsmobile is on the phone, but I don't think it exists anymore, so it doesn't matter. That being said, like, I think contextual has matured so much and can put in a good amount of data, that it's better than what it was. And so I do think there's lots of good reasons to want to use them. So I'm not saying don't use them, or I'm not saying don't think about contextual, but I don't think we're swinging all the way back in that direction. I think though you'll see healthier investments go that way, because there's a combination of, we have first party data on our users, we have relevant content to them, and so we would like to have them. I'm sorry, you would like to reach them. I think their issue. I think providers in those situations are always going to just struggle with the cost model. Like how expensive are you compared to what my metric is? So that's one thing. I think it's partnering with people who have, yes, if you have device, if you have consumer information, if you have identity information, I think partnering with more of those companies, I think, is helpful. I mean, we're not getting away from Google and Facebook. I mean, it's kind of impossible. Though I will say, like, from what I've heard, some of where the CPMs are going and some of the targeting is going, it's becoming less effective on some of those channels. But I think so. I think what I'm hoping for is that your marketing mix will get broader. And so if you look at the total share of money in this whole like duopoly thing, I don't know how many opolies we have at this point. Like, I don't think that ever completely changes, but I don't think that. But when you think about so many companies that are so heavily invested in the Google, Facebook, Amazons of the world, like, I don't know that number ever changes by sheer volume. But I would love to. But I do think that you'll see more and more companies that if you dug into like where your percentage of spends are going, those are going to become more diversified. So in totality, like, yeah, those numbers will still seem insane for what those three partners get. But when you start to break down like where companies are going, I do think more and more companies are going to find ways to spread their investments out, because they have to find those audiences, and they also have to figure out the right cost model to back into what they need from a performance standpoint. Yeah, I
mean, we've already started to see that, right? It was the percentage that would go was, I think it was 3 or 4 years ago, we were close to 80%, slowly starting to creep down, and this company is there for a very good reason, because they perform and they have this incredible plethora of data. So speaking of, let's call it the publisher and the marketer, trying to build out their first party and their zero party. Two of us talked about reasons that a consumer would actually hand their data over and why they do it happily, right? So on the Text Now side, we are providing an essential tool. We're giving them their phone for free.
Right.
In exchange, we are going to gather some types of data, and we're going to ask them questions, and our users happily give it to us. And it's the same at Lending Tree, right? You are doing the competitive bids for them, and you are finding them the best and the most cost-effective product. We think about, is that more of the future, that the consumers are now willing to give out data if there's a benefit? So do companies need to have some kind of value exchange to really build out their data set?
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, because there's this combination of like what makes headlines versus like what's really happening. And there's also, and then I think there's two other things at play. There's a generational dynamic, and then there's also well, let me start with that piece there. So I think the first thing is the quickest answer, most straightforward, is yes. I think yes, information for value exchange, and also frankly information for like, I need to submit this information, like we need specific information in order to give you what you asked for. So so when I think sometimes of value exchange, I also think of 50% off my first order. Like, why wouldn't I just give you my email address? I could unsubscribe later. But that's a value. It's definitely a value. There's some stuff that's less value exchange and more of like, I need this to get my answer. And then maybe I'm just like splitting hairs on the value piece. But my point is like, if you're a company who is in the business of being able to provide solutions to a consumer, and you can gather as much information without overstepping, and overstepping really in terms of like hurting your conversion. So like, this, I'm too new to make an example here, but I don't know if there's probably questions in everybody's, forms. I'm not speaking specifically about Lending Tree, that do you need that piece of information or do you not? Right? Do you need certain, and so if you don't need it, don't ask it, because while you might eventually want to sell that data down the road or use it for targeting, like you don't want to ask the consumer for too much that they're like, why am I giving all this information for?
There's user fatigue.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can say at Comcast, like we were very vigilant about like, what questions do we need just to get you cable? Like, do we need your social security number? Like we actually did, because we had to run a credit thing and there was a whole like back and forth. But so we made a call out on the form to say, here's why we need this, because we were finding people were leaving there. Do we need your date of birth? I don't know if we needed it or not. Like maybe we don't need it. Like if the person can buy cable and they have a credit card, but I think at some point you have to be a certain age. So my point is more of like, ask the right questions that can give you that information, and that builds you up to be a good first party provider, or like you and I were joking about the zero party data people. So I think the value exchange happens in those two places, and the more you can gather that in, the better. I think you just have to balance that line of how much is too much.
Yeah. Okay. So we've got about 5 minutes left. Again, if you have some questions, why don't you type it in? So first question could be, what is an absolute must on the client side? You start to think about data. What's a nice to have, right? And then this is a must.
In terms of, you're talking about proof, like who we're trying to, well, it's interesting. I mean, I wouldn't
say for LendingTree in particular, I would say more in general on the client side when you're formulating a data strategy.
Yeah, I would say yes. Broadly, I think broadly the must have is some level of intent signals that are true to what your product is. So, and just like what I was saying earlier, like not do they like music and do they like to travel, but have they done X? Have they exhibited a behavior that says that's what our consumer does? Because the other thing about clients that I think sometimes folks miss is like, we do a tremendous amount of research on our consumers. Like companies that would come to us, especially in the consumer health world, and say, oh, like we could help you run like user surveys and panel data, not to take anything away from those things, but we spend an inordinate amount of money on like researching this consumer and like, what are their triggers and what do they do? And why do they buy us over the competition? So my point is more that like where you could help is in helping us understand like, wait, your users do these 3 things. We have data that says these 2 things that match up to yours. And so it's a viable user. So in the most oversimplified example, it's, purchase behavior. If you purchased a pain reliever in the last 30 days, you're probably going to purchase it again. So let's reach out in that regard. I think that's some of the things that you're looking at is really those intensive. I think that's really a must have. I think also any sort of qualifiers depending on the product that you have, like, can they buy the product? So if you're an auto manufacturer, like, do they fit into the category where they actually could buy this? If you're a home buyer, like, can you actually purchase that home? I think those are the kinds of things that are useful because you don't want to have too much waste against an audience that's just never going to qualify for the product.
Yeah, makes sense. So that question actually just led to 2 additional ones. So the first one being, how much do you know about real-time in-session behaviors? And then can you actually see, so you and marketers in general, and then the follow-up to that, can you see and react to people that are undecided or have abandoned the cart?
Okay, so yeah. By the way, are these questions coming from the audience, or this is your question? Oh, nice. Thank you,
the audience.
So I'm going to answer broadly. I will say, like, we see companies like LendingTree do see real-time data, but as you can imagine, again, a consumer submits a form and then we match them with lenders. We help them make a decision. So by the time all that, so it's not as immediate because there's obviously a lag time between in which you submit an application, you find a lender, you actually go and get a loan secured. My point is that for most partners, that what I would refer to very broadly or very crudely as like who own the cash register, like you see things in pretty good real time. And you can actually make responses and changes based on that. I mean, I always argue or caution, not argue, I always caution that, like, don't make changes so quickly. Like if you see things dip day over day, like over last week's numbers, like don't be so quick to all of a sudden change your entire strategy or put more money into search because it popped last week. But there's a lot that can be done if you have that information. If you don't own the cash register, so if my product is predominantly bought in a store or through a third party that then has to pass me back data, it takes you a little while to make those decisions. It could be anywhere from 6 weeks, 3 weeks. It could be after the campaign and it's too late to make changes. And you just have to sort of apply those changes in the future.
Okay. Thank you for that. Looks like that was the last question and we are just about at time here. So in the last 90 seconds here, Josh, I always like to hear, what do you think is overrated? What do marketers pay for?
LeBron James. Oh, sorry. Never mind. Let's say so what I think is overrated from marketers?
Yeah, from a marketing perspective, something that costs a lot of money that a lot of marketers tend to invest in. What is not worth the major investment, or let's even call the smaller side?
Yeah. All right. So I'll say this with a caveat to it, because we've talked all about data and this data depravity and like that's not a good. So I think it's a broad principle. I think where marketers overpay for things are when they pay for things, and it could be anything. It could be a platform, it could be a data partner, it could be anything. But they pay for something without thinking through like, what is the end game and how are we going to use it? So just for a quick historical like background, I'll get it in before the end of the time, and I know they won't cut me off anyway. So I've over my career, I've worked with lots of people who wanted to get to some data or to some piece of information or bring on a partner that, by the way, was probably the right thing to do. But given like where we're as an organization, how like our bandwidth, like, trying to get buy-in, I didn't know if there were times where I had to make a decision to say, like, I don't think we need that now. And so I think the biggest thing for if you play out that thread of like, what do we need and what do we not need, is like, what do you need to run the business, make meaningful changes and get meaningful information to actually drive those decisions? Like, what is nice to have beyond that? But if you're going to take on, I think if you're going to take on anything, I think the question is less about cost. It's more of like, what are we going to do with that? And are we equipped to do it? So one thing I will say, a lot of platforms would come and say, hey, we've got this great platform. Here's what it could do. You can use it. But I'm understaffed. Like, I'm never going to be able to use this thing because I'm understaffed and I can't use it. So I think there's some degree of understanding, but I've seen people make the mistake of taking on that platform and realize, has anybody used this platform that we pay for, that we license? No. And by the way, once again, not the platform's fault. It's ours.
We're all guilty of this.
To do it. Right. Exactly. So that's my answer.
That's a great one. Thank you.
Perfect. Oh, she's back. Hi.
And punctual too, Josh.
Hey, I gave you your time, and honestly, you guys could just keep going for the rest of the day. I think that was awesome. So,
perfect. Great.
If you didn't cut us off, we easily could have.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it. And, we hope to see you guys both on the virtual stage or our in-person stage soon as we continue with our hybrid schedule. So thanks so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks. Take care, guys.
All right, so we are heading on to our next session now. We've got a really special session that is actually from one of our best of data-driven marketing events last year. So just something to keep in mind, this is a pre-recorded session, so they will not be able to answer any questions. So just something that we want to point out quick. So that said, we're happy to share this session with Sunil Subhadar, who's the head of growth marketing at Canva. Joining him is his moderator, Warren Chase, who's the global chief embedded solutions officer for MediaMox.
Here we go. How are you, Sunil?
I'm doing great, Warren. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so excited too. I mean, the previous session with Chris and Brittany was really inspiring. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on some of the things that they said before we kick off.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chris has really hit it on the nail, particularly around the education and the fact that every single channel is unique in the nature of how you kind of connect with your customer and the medium and the platform that you do it with. But from a customer's perspective, it's all the same. And so it's really that connective tissue of making sure that you have that continuity across your ads, your landing pages, and into your product and lifecycle marketing.
Awesome. And Sunil, as we kick off our session, and one of the things that we spoke about the other day, I am like super curious, and I know that our audiences will be as well. You came to Canva from Uber, and you made the switch right in the smack in the middle of the pandemic, like possibly the worst time, October of last year, in a time when Uber was massively pivoting from their rides business to their eats business, and then you joined Canva. You joined Canva at a time where massive growth is actually happening as well. So would love for you to take a couple of minutes and just walk us through what that experience was like.
Yeah, just setting the stage. So for those of you who are not familiar, Canva is a design and communication tool suite. We have a community of over 55 million members across the world in hundreds of markets. And, both Uber and Canva are really great examples of hyper-growth companies. And so Canva really has this mission to democratize design and empower anyone to design anything and publish anywhere. And originally the product was designed for consumers and content creators, but early last year when COVID hit, we saw a real surge in a different type of user base, and that fell into two distinct audiences that we've defined. One is called knowledge workers, i.e. ourselves, anyone using design tool suite in a professional capacity, and educators. And so with knowledge workers, what we saw is now we're all remote working, we're in a distributed workforce, we're across the world. And so how do we communicate and collaborate? And one of the things that we saw was most challenging was this idea that you start often with a blank slate. When you open PowerPoint, when you open Google Slides, it's blank. Unless you have a really big creative team that's designed you beautiful templates, you have to kind of build from scratch. And so we've really invested in going out there to find those types of templates to give you a starting point to create your content. We've also started to think about like native formats. And so one of the unique products we have is called Talking Presentations. And so rather than all those crazy footnotes at the bottom of your presentations, you can actually VO your presentation and then distribute it. So it's a one-time, creation and then a distribution that can be asynchronously consumed. For educators, we saw that, as all students were starting to go remote work learning, it was really challenging, and Zoom fatigue was really, really tough, particularly with kids. And so we saw teachers trying to use our product to build worksheets. And so we went out and found really great educational worksheet templates that teachers could use. We integrated into what are called learning management systems so that the teachers could deploy this to students. Students could do an easy drag and drop, more engaging type of worksheet engagement. And so what is to say is, like with any kind of product, things evolve as the nature of the environment changes. And as marketers, this is a very interesting challenge because essentially we've built a super app with all these different great use cases, but every single customer has a very different job to be done and use case. And so what I've really come in and focused on is really building the infrastructure to think about how we scale this efforts across the number of audiences, across the number of markets, and across the different types of consumer behaviors or motions, whether it's a consumer, a B2B, or a B2C customer.
So Neil, do you see anything changing, with kids going back to school, people going back to offices in some sort of capacity? How do you see this is evolving in the use of Canva as a product?
Yeah, I think that it's still really too early to tell. A lot of what we're seeing is, and I imagine is, some of the nature of what we were doing remotely actually still works. And so the need to maybe have as many meetings, the need to be actually in person in the same office is changing. I mean, we're already seeing that there is larger companies are allowing their employee base to be more distributed across the locations. So I think that this idea of asynchronous communication and collaboration is still going to increase. With students, I think it's also going to be another interesting kind of development. I think that there were some elements of the way you could engage a student outside of the normal classroom, and we think that we can evolve that product suite as well.
Where are you seeing the most growth within your different audiences?
Yeah, I think that the growth is really coming in two areas. One is globally. We're just seeing tremendous growth of our product being used in India, Brazil, and into EMEA and APAC. Other is kind of what I mentioned is this knowledge worker base. We've kind of doubled the number of members that brands.
Awesome. And so Sunil, as you build Canva to scale as a data-driven organization, how do you think about setting those foundations
And in a year from now, what is going to actually be the need? And there is this gap, and you either can solve it with headcount or with tooling. And so it was trying to figure out that balance. The second was the skill sets and specialty. If you're a consumer-facing company and now you have to do B2B, you have to either hire or upskill people to be able to do B2B motions. And then the next kind of element is really around your stakeholders. So you have product marketing asks, you have product team asks, you have other different groups in a matrix organization that need your services. And so you have to build processes to actually intake and create objective prioritization around your resourcing because you have that limited capacity. The next is really around the champions, because if you're building this, you need a content powerhouse. And so you need to have synergies and collaboration and alignment across your creative group, your product and insights group. You need to have your MarTech group, and you need to have the element of how you kind of tie all that together to be able to deliver the global scale of what we're trying to accomplish. And so then the final is the leadership. Really, to build a data-driven company, it has to come from the top level. There has to be a commitment to that investment, and that if you're not a product-focused company, investing in MarTech to actually design the systems to support this can be challenging. And there is also that expectation around the fact that this cannot happen overnight. It takes about 2 quarters minimum just to even get some early gains of showing like what's possible with this type of system. And so it's really making sure that you are upselling. You are a marketer outside, you have to be a marketer inside your company, upselling that vision and also creating clear milestones to showcase how those gains are happening, whether it's in terms of the efficiency or in terms of the FTEs that have been saved, as well as like the impact, your cost per is kind of going down as you start to be able to scale and reduce ad fatigue.
Did you, when you joined and you started laying out this, this framework, did you find any hurdles along the way? Were you surprised about anything within the, the current organization, or barriers that you needed to overcome?
I think that the biggest thing I saw was the underestimation of the number of data and engineers that you need to build this. At Uber, we had a 200-person team thinking about MarTech. Right. We are right now a 30-person team. So I think that it's just understanding that acceleration of the number of type of people you need to be able to build that type of system is increased. It's quite a heavy investment. And so it really has to be that you have a pipeline of talent that's focused on that. And a lot of companies think about engineers as kind of like a funnel, like where you kind of bring in engineers and then they kind of get distributed. Particularly for MarTech, these are certain skill sets that you need to ramp up quickly. And so you actually need to have your own dedicated funnel for these types of hires.
Great. Awesome. So how do you tend to look at the value of marketing data, particularly outside the marketing silo, and how do you communicate that value to stakeholders?
Yeah, I think that, the data set, for your first party data of your company is the most valuable thing, particularly as we start to lose a lot more of the attribution from the third party systems. And so it's really making sure that you have a correct formatting of that data that can make it actionable. And I think about this from 2 lenses of how you actually can make data actionable and powered. The first is the fact that a lot of the opportunity is to use your product level intelligence engine to actually power your marketing efforts. If you actually want to make a great product, you have to have AI and recommendation engines built into it to actually show what you should be doing next and what is the best way to use the product. Similarly, those are the same ways you can actually showcase your product in your marketing efforts. So at Uber, we designed creative that was showing you top eats or top rides in your city. That was powered by our product, but we were actually able to show that, and that was very effective. For us, we've been kind of starting to think about how we power the top templates that people are using into our ad creative. The other aspect is the fact that marketing is on the front lines of actually testing and learning into the customers and how they're actually resonating with our creative. And so what is unique at a hypergrowth company is your customer today is not your customer of tomorrow. And so you actually can inform a lot of product by showcasing what's happening in the way that your prospective customers are engaging with your creative. And so having that two-way communication is really important. And so a great example is in India, we saw that there was a real popularity around religious holidays. And so we were testing like Diwali creative, and it worked really, really well. But the idea that religious holidays is not just for India, it's for other similar markets. You can build that kind of concept to work in other markets. And similarly in the product, you should be investing in more of those types of templates or use cases to solve for.
Yeah, that's great. And with obviously full disclosure, right? Media Monks and Canva, we work together, so we have you as a client. Interesting for our audiences to understand. So how do you decide what to build in-house versus when you partner with external agencies?
Yeah, it's a very important kind of journey, I think about it. First is, I think about it is, do you have proprietary data? Do you have the skill sets? Do you have, does the third-party tools handle the complexity of your work? And is that work valuable for you to continue to do in your organization from a specialty and value skill set? So for the first one, it's really understanding that you have to think about your capacity to be able to leverage your first party data. And I believe that the intelligence engine, more than any time before, should be in-house. With the privacy and data consent concerns, sending your data outside your systems can be a challenge. And so, you want to basically start to create signals to send to your partners to be to have the algorithms learn versus kind of sending all your data out there. The second is really the specialty and skill set. Do you actually have team members who can do these things, particularly data science or technical? And so that's where you can lean into agencies to kind of learn and help you support that till you hit that capacity to know that this is a worthy investment inside your company. The next is really around third-party tools. And I've seen that as you start to scale, as you need these more complex measurement and dynamic content systems, one becomes expensive, and two, the tools can start to hit their limits. And so that's when you start to realize that you need to build some components proprietarily in-house to then sit on top of these other platforms. And the last, I think, one we were discussing is, to scale the amount of content, to build thousands and thousands of creative, that would take an army of people. And so there is this opportunity to partner with a great agency like yourself to be the complementary service to fuel global creative using a template brand toolkit and a way of disseminating that across different languages and different markets and different ad sizes.
Yeah, and one of the things that we have noticed a lot, especially within our world, is this world moves really fast. Like, we have no time. Everything is in real time. We have no time to brief the agency, and then they go away and they come back with solution or an idea 2 weeks later. And like that doesn't really work. So and one of the things that we have seen a lot, especially with the practice and the unit that I run at Media Monks, yes, we have grown a lot with embedded talent inside our clients' organizations, whether they're sitting side by side, with our clients, or sitting remotely, but it's like almost like an extension of your own team. How has that played, or does that play as an advantage in getting to your outcomes better and faster?
Absolutely. And the way I ever think about a relationship with an agency is it is an extension of my team. I actually have them have specific KPIs that they're actually having to meet and be accountable towards in order to actually perform their role. And I want them to be a part of the team, a part of the key meetings, so that they understand the business objectives and what we're trying to do. And also, I actually, in some cases, involved in the hiring for certain skill sets to know that you have to have that technical skill set or knowledge to be able to create that velocity and performance of creative that is unique in the nature of these enterprise level marketing.
And I guess also the ability to scale up or down. You move people around. Sometimes you need different skill sets. Yep. Yeah, we're seeing a lot of that. Sunil, how do you keep up with the latest trends?
Yeah, I mean, I read a lot of articles, but I think that the best way is to talk to peers in my industry and share learnings. I think that I found there to be a very open and collaborative group, as long as you're not in the exact same competitive landscape. And so I really look to a lot of companies to see what they're doing really well and sharing best practices.
Would you have done anything differently at Uber with what you have learned at Canva?
I think that what is nice about Canva is that, you know, the way Uber was designed was marketing was kind of a secondary thing. We believe that the product actually would just grow users. And at Canva, it is always believed, because we are a content community and creator community, that this is the bread and butter. And so I think what has been exciting is that we are actually really creating a tight integration of the creative and the product that we use actually being a version of a future product we could actually design for our customers. So we're dog fooding our product in many ways in terms of how we're doing our marketing efforts.
Another interesting question. What are some key learnings around, you know, doing successful data-driven marketing at scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it really has to focus on a clear objective of what you're trying to achieve. There are some early metrics that you can look at in terms of click-through or engagement rate, and then you're really trying to look at more further metrics. And so, you know, when you're starting to think about, you know, what are those early indicators of success, you first can start to think about it from an internal process perspective of, are you becoming more efficient with your time and your team's resources to be able to run campaigns faster, to be able to create a more output and volume of your creative? And then you start to see, is it actually making it more efficient? Because we know about creative ad fatigue, particularly in like a social channel. So the fact that you have more creative to work with, you should start to see that your cost pers are starting to go down, and that the relevancy of your ad should hopefully create a better targeting experience, so that your customers are more likely to actually engage with your ad and kind of move through the journey funnel.
Great, awesome. I guess we can open up for questions from.
All right, well, that was a great session. So now looking ahead, we have a really exciting session coming up here shortly, featuring Danielle Porto-Pera, who's the Chief Marketing and Digital Officer for Focus Brands, and our moderator, which is our very own Evie Moss, who's Senior Vice President of Content and Community here at Brand Innovators. You're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, how are you?
Hi, good. I'm currently a podcaster, Maddie. I should know to have.
I was going to say, this is your bread and butter right here.
I know, and I did not plug in my microphone. So let's see. Okay.
Well, I can hear you just fine.
Okay. All right. Well, we have an amazing person behind the scenes. I really want to thank Brianna, who has been shuttling people in and out throughout this whole session. She does this day in and day out, as we do a lot of content at Brand Innovators. So by way of that, I'm going to check. Brianna, how's my audio? Okay. She has like a little text thing in the background that's brilliant. So I'm going to assume that everything is okay. Maddie, thank you so much for emceeing this. You also are a force to be reckoned with.
Oh, please. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
It's not too bad of a job. It's actually quite fun. So yeah, it's been a good day so far, and looking forward to welcoming Danielle on, who I know is going to be a couple minutes late. So
actually, I think there she is. Look at what you did. You're brilliant. Yay.
Oh, amazing timing.
You started
really
saying Danielle,
timing.
and then it was instantly, I felt like when the Harry Potter world or something there.
I manifested it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining, Danielle. I'll pass it off to the two of you so you guys can get started.
Terrific. Hey, Danielle, thank you for joining us. You're 2 for 2 now with being a valued guest here on a Brand Innovators live cast. And this is once again about digital and how you've been pivoting in that world. So how was your day so far today? Let's start with the human touch.
Thank you. It's been going well. Speaking of digital, in the last 24 hours, I've gotten a new iPhone. And so that opened my eyes to how do we keep the customer experience, our eye on the customer experience for what happens in our apps when people have to switch phones too. So it's been an interesting 24 hours.
Exactly right. Well, I do want to give everybody a little bit more background on you. I know you through my dear friend Elise Coben, but now the Brand Innovators audience knows you as well from your last round a couple of months ago with us on the Women in QSR Marketing. You can catch that on demand on our fabulous YouTube channel. But when I look back, Danielle, at your storied bio, it's like I keep thinking of the Johnny Cash song. You've been everywhere, woman. You've been everywhere. So one example, you went from Petco to Pep Boys, but you started in tech. So what I would love is for you to fill in the blanks of what took you from being like a woman who codes, so to speak, to being an evangelizer of marketing done with a human touch. Let's hear a little bit more about your background.
I love that tee up, and I always tell folks it's my little secret now that I did start my career coding databases. So I don't know if I can do it anymore, but could write some SQL queries with the best of them and design large scale databases before big data was a cool term. But you know what? Starting in that space gives you a focus on how the signals that are in data and how having the customer at the center of everything you do really can power successful business and long-standing brand differentiation and outsized market share growth over competition. And so, that really is kind of the common thread. And you're right. I've been in the casino business, worked for Caesars Entertainment for a number of years, in the pet space, worked for Carl Icahn at Pep Boys in the automotive space, and now am in the food and beverage space. But the thread through that is that focus on the customer, is that focus on really classic branding, but classic branding that comes to life through informed data and analytics, because that's where you really win at the end of the day. And, my first transition from the consulting side and the technology side was 2 clients of mine. So I went to work for Caesars Entertainment, where I had helped Harrah's and Caesars actually build, and Teradata was a great partner to them in building their loyalty program and the total rewards program, well recognized, particularly at that point in time, for being a leader in one of the first cross-brand loyalty programs, in being able to really create a personalized experience that transcended being on property, being at home, offers that you had from your host, as well as VIP events. And so very well-rounded experiential program, but the entire underpinning of it was data. And it was having knowledge of your customer and being able to make the best offer that's relevant to them. And, you fast forward through, doesn't matter how many years exactly, but you fast forward through a number of years and technology changes. And that strategic underpinning is as true now as it was then. We just have a lot more fantastic tools and precision with which we can put digital and data to work these days.
Wow. So I know that we're going to get to the word phygital, which you used before, but it sounds like you have really navigated both the physical and the digital and all things in between. Will you remind us again, what's your exact role now with Focus Brands?
Great question. So I look out for marketing and culinary for our restaurant brands. So that makes me the Senior Vice President of Marketing for our restaurant brands. And that includes the culinary team. You know, in our business, obviously what you're serving to customers is absolutely core to that experience. And so that's Moe's, McAllister's, and Schlotzsky's within our portfolio of brands.
Great. I'm glad that we got those brand names out there. We are, after all, brand innovators.
I know I couldn't. I will be transparent. I did not have time to put the brand innovators background up, and so I'm taking the shameless opportunity to have Moe's and Schlotzsky's in the background here.
That's perfect. You're walking the walk, my friend. That's fine. So, what we want to talk about today is, this is titled "Adopting to a Data-Deprived Future." So, tell us what it means. With all of the impending regulations and requirements changing that takes us from and to a data-deprived future, first party, third party. Give us a little layperson explanation of that.
You know, it brings up such a great question because you hear these terms that sound a little cataclysmic, right? And they sound very scary of cookie deprecation, and we're going to be in a cookieless future. And what does that mean? We're not going to have data available. There will be changes. 100% there's going to be changes. And those that are most prepared for those changes are going to be most successful, but we're not going to be in a data deprived future. It's just a different data future, right? And I think that's where you have to look at how you intersect what you can gather on your own customers. What first party data is the term, right? But the simple way of thinking about first party data means what relationship can you build with your own customers, and what reasons can you give them to share some of that data with you, to join a loyalty program, to provide information on their preferences. And then you have to be able to keep and store that and be prepared to use it to personalize the experience with the guests. It's very much a two-way dialogue with them, but that's the concept of first-party data. And the more you do that, the easier it becomes to tie that to behavior that happens, outside of your stores or online outside of your digital properties, because there are ways to intersect that first-party data and sort of find those customers in a privacy safe way in that infrastructure out of your own properties. And I think that's going to be such a critical component of the future. And the other aspect of that is there are big providers out there, and Google's at the top of that list, who, while they are, respecting privacy in the sense of not sharing their users' data outside of themselves, there's a tremendous amount that Google knows within their property and ecosystems. And that's a large part of, the United States and really users globally that interact in that Google ecosystem, which means you still have a lot of the ability as a marketer to serve up and to target content in, you'll hear a term like walled gardens. And Google's one example. There's several others. Obviously, Facebook and Meta is another example of that, where they're trying to do the same thing, build that relationship with those customers, have the trust. But the reality is, as a marketer, you can work with each of those partners and be able to still serve up a tailored experience too. It's just going to be different than in the past, where you could look more universally using third-party cookies.
So I'm going to keep it at the treetops for a second. You famously have always talked about the fact that we have to blend what we call brand and demand. But first party data really starts with gaining trust of the brand and agreeing to give up your personal information. Are there some examples of how you've navigated that? How do you get the Focus brand various restaurant customers to agree to offer up that data and allow you to reach out to them directly?
It's multiple layers to that. So, there's rewarding them. I mean, consumers understand that there's that relationship piece of, hey, if I'm going to give you a reward, and whether that's something you build to in a loyalty program or something immediate, like a free tea or a free cup of queso in our world, that's something where consumers then have the opportunity to weigh that, hey, yes, I want to sign up and engage in your loyalty program, because for me, a free queso has a huge value add. It's also a fun, unique part of the Moe's brand. And so it makes sense to them to provide that information, but you can't stop there, because that might be something that becomes transactional if you don't follow up with the customer. So, you stick on that Moe's example, free queso when you sign up for our loyalty program. That's something that we market in digital media. It's something that we have the messaging available in store. We encourage our team members to be able to have that conversation with customers. But again, you don't stop there. Then it's the follow-up communications to, provide value on, here's the overall Moe's brand. Here's some of our upcoming, specials or promotions. Or here's just a really cool and fun way to engage you with a brand like Moe's, give you some behind the scenes content, because the experiential stuff is just as important. And so, at the end of the day, you have to provide value to customers to get them to provide that data. Some of it, and oftentimes to get someone to sign up for a loyalty program, there's first immediate benefit to that, right? Something that you can redeem and has value to you pretty quickly as a customer, and a high enough perceived value as a customer. But then it really is, do I value these communications I'm getting from you? And, am I going to still, be paying attention to you as a brand in that? And so that's the next step, is to start to use those signals. If you come in that first experience, you're purchasing kids meals and a main entree, well, now I know that you're a parent with children. So maybe I follow up with another offer that gives you a discount off of a kids meal, or a free kids meal when you purchase an entree. Or maybe I provide you some value added content about, kids in the community, and talk about how we sponsor, local baseball teams. So it's about using that data to continue to give customers a reason to share more with you and stay in that relationship with you.
So true customization. And I will point out that I do work for cheese. So you can have my data for that case. So I'm good with that.
I would make this argument, and obviously I might be a little biased, but I truly think it's correct. Moe's has the best queso in the business.
Okay. She's working the brand on the brand innovator side again. That's good. That's fine. So, all right, now we have created trust, we have captured that data, and now you have to kind of do two things. You have to make sure that you have enough. So you're trying to build the scale of that. And I guess, working with the Meta, the Googles, the whatever, but also you have to customize and sort of customize locally at scale, I guess we would say. How do you approach hyper personalization, parsing out that data? What do you use, and how have you evolved your techniques these days?
And, I'll start with examples on some of our digital properties. And the first important thing to say is you're never done. The importance of that personalization is having an agile mindset and continuing to learn from what your customers are teaching you, their changing needs, and quite frankly, what's working and what's not. It needs to be something where you're actively engaged and continuing to evaluate, what should I be doing different? What can I do next? One of the ways that we engage in that hyper personalization in the digital space is something that we've chosen to call, and it's definitely, an industry term to our marketing term, is customer lifetime value optimization, or CLTV. And so what that basically means is use that data and use those signals, and also test out different offers and different creative, what works best. And so sometimes that's delivered via email. Sometimes that's delivered when you're on the website and you're getting ready to check out, what's my personalized suggestive sell item that I'm going to provide to you, right? And so sometimes I'm reaching out to you when you're not in a purchase engagement, and that's, for example, via email, and I'm trying to give you a reason to come in and choose Moe's for your dining option, to stick on the Moe's example this week. Other times you're on the site and I want to, and sent an add-on or give you something that's customized. But if I guess wrong or present you something that's not relevant to you, then not only might you not buy that, but it really might turn you off from that entire transaction. So we use data and those signals in those two examples of what's the best offer that's going to be relevant to you. And that's that customer lifetime value optimization and proactively using channels like email or push messaging in the app to deliver that. But then also when you're on the site, what can I do to make that experience feel more personalized? And, we are not, at the end state of that journey. Again, I'd say we're learning, we're cultivating, and there's always opportunity for more, but it's one of the key components of Focus Brand's roadmap over the next 2 to 3 years is to continue to roll those things out across all of our brands and make them more and more robust so that you have thousands and thousands of those offer permutations and you pick the right one for the right customer at the right time.
Well, you teed me up perfectly to ask you again about what made news just a couple of months ago, and 2 months in since coming out with the claim that you would envision that 50% of your sales would be digitally driven by 2027. How are you since coming out with that vision for Focus Brands restaurants?
I love it. Being metrics driven, you got to say, how are we tracking, right? And you're paying attention to the stats. So one of the first key things that we're really working with a lot of our franchisees, and you mentioned locally too. And so this is down to the team members in the store. This brings together local and the phygital piece, because we have to have the team members and our franchisees really understanding the importance of building towards that digital future, because they're a huge gateway to getting our customers to enroll in the loyalty program, which is the first part of creating that flywheel for how we can do these personalized offers. So happy to say that is well underway, and we've seen significant increases in most of our brands in the amount of loyalty signups and loyalty penetration. So the amount of folks within any given store that are using the loyalty program, we've definitely seen strong growth in all of our brands over the last couple months. And that's wonderful, because it says we're providing that right value to customers to sign up. We're getting our team members excited and engaged, and they believe there's a reason to talk to their customers about that. And so very, very strong kind of first component is getting that loyalty engagement. And then also we, in a couple of our key brands, McAllister is an example of this, where we've really leaned into testing probably 50 different at this point permutations of those customer lifetime value offers to get those learnings. And again, you're learning, you're adapting, and we have agile sprints along the way that bring those things to life.
Well, that's not just A/B testing, that's A/B twice and squared. Wow.
That's when you understand why machine learning is a real thing, is when you start getting to that math. Yes.
Wow. Yes, which I failed several times in school, which also tees me up now to ask you about the other side of things, because again, you have talked about the need to balance the data, the tech, your roots with marketing, so performance and brand awareness. And it sounds like you're really recruiting your franchisees and your staff to be human, but how do you balance that with this goal to be half digital in just a couple of years?
That's where the magic gets created, is those two things work together. I think I've said to you before, one of my personal pet peeves in marketing is things are teed up as an or choice. Are you doing digital or traditional? Are you doing branding or digital? And that's personally my view, not the right way to be thinking about it. Our job as marketers is to be doing both in an integrated way, because the customer is receiving all of that at once. And you cannot just have a transactional relationship with your customers. You have to have that emotional component, and you have to be differentiated. You have to be creative. You have to break through, and that has to sit together. So I'll give you a McAllister's example. Sweet tea is one of the most famous properties for McAllister's. When you kind of look at a brand, you say, what's your equity, right? And for McAllister's, it is tea, hands down, proprietary blend. Customers love it. We have signature cups. It just has a huge legacy and a lot of brand equity. And so you find yourself thinking, well, how do you continue to take that to the next level? And what do you do that combines the physical and the digital? So McAllister's has just run it's more than a promotion. It's a program where we partnered with an ice cream creator and Creamalicious, and they created a sweet tea ice cream. So now you have something that's completely custom. We don't typically McAllister's sell ice cream, but let's create a sweet tea ice cream that brings us into a whole new product line, completely relevant for summer, gives you exclusivity where you have the ability to tell your customers, you've never tasted anything like this before. Come into McAllister's. Gave us a great opportunity to have a large PR push, billions and billions of impressions from a PR standpoint. And you tied some of the benefits in trying it to being a member of the loyalty program. So it goes back to, again, that formula of you got to give customers a benefit and you have to still do that creative breakthrough thinking. And so now you've created a program that increases our loyalty signups and personalization, ties it to that data-driven digital experience, but is very rooted in driving traffic to the store and something that's breakthrough and unique to the brand.
And are you continuously looping that, like sort of a silly example, but did you do any kind of polling to determine what would be your favorite flavor? And are you, bringing in your social media strategy and all of that to connect all the dots?
Absolutely. And we do that feedback from our customers in a couple of different ways. It's honestly another benefit that customers see in having a relationship with us, back to that first party data, because we'll reach out and ask them. We do it in surveys. We'll survey some of our most frequent guests. We'll reach out after you come in and visit us and include some questions in a post-visit survey, because we want to engage people. And it is amazing. It's part of this is industry and part of it is our brands. But people really, really feel passionate about the food, and they, feel like it's my McAllister's or it's my Moe's. And the amount of responses we get when we reach out to our database of customers is actually amazing. Within a couple hours, we'll have way more than enough sample size to make some key decisions on things, because people want to give their opinion. And, to your point, we then parlay that into social. So I think you'll see a continued explosion in social. We use outlets like TikTok very effectively, particularly in some of our brands on the specialty side of the business. Auntie Anne, Cinnabon have fantastic presence there. We're growing that more and more on the restaurant side, because again, customers want to interact, and that's another way that you can get that feedback and you can build that relationship.
Absolutely. And I'm among those who likes to share her opinion. We feel empowered. And I love that you give your customers the platform, the sort of dais to be able to share that. And apparently they're feeling heard, which I think is a key part. So, all right, you're a big organization. We know historically that sales and marketing, or data and creative, we're always trying to weave together those several departments. How do you balance creative and data without one strong arming the other?
It's always a conversation.
Oh, that. You mean not texting?
Right. I think, it's two pieces and they're critical. One is the process, quite frankly. You've got to bring people together in those ideation sessions. And so we've invested a lot as we're starting, if you back up the marketing planning cycle and you're farther out in your planning, and we're really thinking about what do we want to bring to market for a particular brand 6 months from now or a year from now, you have those multiple voices in the room at the same time. And you have, both the quantitative data and the insights and qualitative data about your customers. So you have the customer sitting at the table with you. You also have the finance piece, right? Because we need to look out at the end of the day, we're driving demand generation. And in our business, our job is to help the franchisees achieve their livelihood goals, right? We've got to drive profitable traffic to our restaurants. So you have to have, your sales and traffic goals sitting there with you. But you also have to have the creative and the branding and, where are we going to win? Where are we unique from competition? How do we facilitate those brainstorming sessions that now we're clear on our financial objectives and opportunities? Now let's make the space to have the creative discussion and the creative brainstorming of what's our central idea, what's our big idea that can help deliver on those financial pieces. So we've invested significantly in that process, really working the process and making sure that we're starting from the intersection of both of those things equally, which is what are the financials we need to drive for the business, and the underpinnings of that sitting right next to what's the long-term brand equity and how do we need to continue to differentiate ourselves from the competition.
Danielle, I just have to sidebar and say, hearing you speak, the enormity of a role like yours to oversee all aspects of this and put it through the sieve and come out with the proper mix is really remarkable, and my hat's off to you. I also know that it's not so easy to find talent these days with our current job market and things like that. And as you talk about the right messaging, conversely, we also need to have more diverse voices in the room. So I'm going to throw you a curveball and just ask you, how do you apply, data and creative to soliciting new voices? And how are you also appealing to diverse customer ears?
Great question. And a lot of that starts with the communities we serve, and it starts with us internally as an organization and valuing diversity. And so, to the communities we serve, our customer bases are very diverse. Within a brand, there's diversity, certainly in some cases by geography or location, but on the whole, we have, a lot of diversity, and we have to continue to honor that and cultivate it and do our best to make sure we reflect the diversity that exists in the communities that we serve. And that's super important to focus brands. And so on that internal piece, again, there's always more work to be done, but we have employee engagement groups and really continuing to cultivate that. One of my favorite is the Asian American and Pacific Islanders group, but just to be a part of that team and in conversations with that employee resource group, the passion, the pride and what they bring to the entire dialogue is absolutely inspiring to watch. So we're continuing to invest in those employee resource groups. It's important for us as we're looking for talent. It's important for us as we're looking for vendors. We just completed a media RFP for all 7 of our brands. And in that, front and center is diversity and making sure that the suppliers we're partnering with have a clear strategy, not words on paper, but things you can demonstrate around that diversity, because it all goes back to serving diverse communities, and that we need to do our best to continue to reflect that and empower the people at a local level to reflect what's relevant for their communities.
Well said. And by the way, the human side again is who wouldn't want to work for you. So, so you've talked about taking a holistic view across all brands, but you also have to sort of amplify the individuality of one. Do you bring all of your data together so that you have more scale? Are you using or employing different tech for one brand over the other? How do you differentiate and sort of make things universal at the same time?
Oh, that is the continual balancing act. And it's what is the power and the opportunity for a portfolio company like ours. So the opportunity and the power is to be able to say to our franchisees, if you invest in opening stores with us, you're going to get something that your brand alone, quite honestly, would not be able to afford, right? We can build these platforms and have a significant amount of scale, both talent, technology, investment, processes that you couldn't get if you were investing in a brand of a similar size that was standalone, because you can't afford to carry all of that on the P&L. Your ad fund, your budgets aren't going to support that. But you plug into this engine and you're going to get these world-class platforms that help you punch above your weight and level up versus your competitors in your local market. And so it's a very compelling opportunity for franchisees. For us on the execution side of that, then it's about being crystal clear. In media, for example, every brand, all 7, have their own dedicated media plan They have, clearly their own audiences that are defined and objectives that are defined based upon that brand's unique value proposition and positioning and menu and customer relationships and experience in the store. However, we leverage the scale. So, when you're having a conversation with some of the larger media providers, you're doing it across the entire portfolio. So you're getting better rates and preferential treatment. When we're thinking about the approach to constructing a media plan and to measuring media, that's consistent across all of them, because that's how you best leverage, the data science and analytics. So it's about deploying that scale where it makes sense and where it pluses up the brand, but having also an absolute laser focus on making sure those brands keep their differentiation in the customer experience, in their brand positioning, and in their menu.
Thank you. I only have 2 more questions for you, but I wanted to just give everybody the opportunity to use the chat little icon at the bottom if you have a remaining burning question for Danielle Para of Focus Brands. And what the heck was I going to ask you?
Hopefully not which food is my favorite, because that's like picking your favorite child. I cannot do that in any public forum.
We know it's queso and sweet tea, though. I wanted to go back to the definition of, phygital, and just sort of circle back for a period at the end of the sentence about your digital goals and how you see those 2 things balancing the value prop to customers versus the need that we all have to be in touch and in person. Can you paint a picture for us of what that might look like for both sides of the coin for the customer?
Absolutely. And I'm going to do it to you again of saying tie it together. So the reason the digital piece and the way we think about it is creating the most meaningful, personalized experience for the customer that adds value to their daily life. And that, when we lay out our customer journeys, we're stitching it together. Honestly, even when they're not engaged with us, what are they doing when they're home? What mindsets are they in? What challenges are they facing? Are they someone who's now come back to an office and they're looking for lunch solutions? Are they someone who's in an office and need a catering solution? Are they a busy family who around 4 p.m. today is going to need to figure out what to feed everyone at home? And so we think about that entire digital experience, the customer service experience, starting with what problems can we best solve for customers, and how do we present that to them in a way that's personalized and relevant to them. And so, that drives our marketing agenda, from what message are we going to give you at what time of day, based on what signals we know about you. Like I said, if you're a business person at lunch versus a family looking for a dinner solution. And it also drives above that how we're designing our stores. So for instance, Schlotzsky's newest store prototype is Design 1000. It's a small footprint, but 2 drive-throughs meant to facilitate, again, as we've thought about that customer journey. Well, now we're going to have more digital. And we're going to have third-party delivery drivers, get them through, but keep that drive-through customer who just got the message popped on their ways that there's a Schlotzsky's drive-through. We got to make sure we're there to serve them too. And if you have someone who wants to come dine in, we still have that dining experience. And so it really permeates everything from the marketing all the way through to the store prototype designs, coming from the perspective of putting yourself in your customer's shoes.
I think that's such a fascinating example. I never thought about how your digital footprint impacts your physical real store footprint and the considerations that you have to have as you shift strategies. That
even
is
back to the
holistic
kitchen.
Thinking. Even
designing new kitchen equipment and lines to be able to service that. There is no separation between the 2. And that's why the phygital piece you hear me keep talking about, because if you stop with just one or the other, the customer experience isn't where it needs to be.
Maddie, welcome back. I'm going to ask Danielle one last burning question that I have.
Rush. I have to mention though, I'm so hungry, and Auntie Anne's my favorite. So this is like
She
the
works for queso also.
So it wouldn't help for me to describe the smells I'm having from the test kitchen downstairs.
No, don't, because that's going to make it worse. But no, Evie, go ahead. Yeah.
She's a brand marketer from way back. Now she's, enveloping all of our senses. Pretty soon she's going to hold up a cup of queso.
I haven't figured out how to get the scent to come through the computer screen yet. That, my friend Evie, there you go. That is truly the intersection. We need that.
Well, that actually also tees up my last question, which is about media and where we're going, because that reminds me of that attempt to do like smell-o-vision in theaters and things like that. So assuming we can't do that, where are you shifting from and to as you embrace that 2027 goal of 50% of sales coming from digital?
It depends on the brand, because it depends on what we need to accomplish in the brand equity space. Are we trying to change preference or perception? We're trying to get awareness, but the reality is some of the larger opportunities, and for brands like us, right? Look, we do not have upfront level, media spend pieces. So things like, traditional linear TV and audio don't make sense for us. Mm-hmm. However, there's so much opportunity in OTT TV and a lot of the, tailored digital audio components. We're still getting that experience. We are able to do the storytelling, and you're able to do that in an efficient way that makes sense, because you can also target it only around the radius of the stores where you're located if you're not truly a national brand. So those are the things of the future, is finding those ways that you can accomplish that classic need for storytelling, the classic need for building that brand equity, but do it in a realistic way for your budget and for, the location of your business. And so those are some of the key opportunities, we see there. A lot of it on organic social. So you have organic and paid social. The two have to work together. There's absolutely a pay for play approach there, but the stronger you are in the content you're putting out, the better the impact. And that's where for us, we've seen that. I mean, to absolutely fanatical fan levels on TikTok with, a Cinnabon and an Auntie Anne's as we're putting product out there, or we're telling some behind the scenes stories. And so I think, it's creating that ecosystem. Moe's just did a spicy shack. So we had spicy chicken. We actually partnered with an Airbnb host and decked out an entire Airbnb in Miami, because where else are you going to do something spicy but Miami? Makes total sense.
Oh my.
We did spicy shack, so you can reserve it. So tremendous amount of PR coverage, but it also fed organic social, and it also tied into our paid media communications as well.
Wow. Oh, okay. That was very meaty for a last question, the way you answered it. I love that. Thank you so much. And Danielle, I'm going to put you on the spot and hope that you're going to join us in person, since I've seen you on screen virtually twice. Let me take you from the digital to the physical, and please join us at our New York Media Buying Summit coming up in October. I hope I'll see you there.
That's, it's my birthday month, so
we'll celebrate all month long. That's right.
I just wanted to point out too, Danielle, it's really interesting. I was going to bring up TikTok, and I can't imagine the organic content that you guys get from that. Especially, I'm a Gen Zer, so I love that content and anything that's fun and natural like that. So I'll have to go on and find those videos, because on it all day, every day. So,
well, and that's what's fun. You've reached, a good fan base level. We do have some passion brands where, individual content creators are out there mentioning your brands. And so we'll see those pop up from some of our monitoring, which is great, and that's the thing. You got to roll with the punches. Sometimes you're like, well, I don't know that I would put my brand in that light, but whatevs. It's definitely organic and it's helping with the engagement.
Yeah. Well, I will say I don't need to be influenced. Like I said, I already love Auntie Anne's and go there every time I'm at the mall, but I am very easily influenced by TikTok. I will be the first to admit, and I think a lot of us are as well. So that's awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. As Evie said, we'd love to see you in person. There's a lot of events coming up on the schedule for later this year. So until then, maybe we'll see you again virtually, but have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thank you.